Joining us now, CNN political commentator and attorney Bakari Sellers, also with us Cheryl Dorsey. She's a retired Los Angeles police sergeant and author of Black and Blue, the creation of a social advocate. Friends, look, I know we will ask the question, how could a police officer make a mistake? Is that even possible? But Bakari, before you even get to that question, the fact of the matter is Daunte Wright is dead this morning. Daunte Wright is dead. And I just want you to reflect on what we saw yesterday, what we saw overnight, and the entire reaction and explanation to this point.
Yeah, that's a really good question, John. But it's more than just Daunte Wright is dead. It's, you know, a father is dead, a son is dead, a nephew is dead. You know, a young man who had, you know, 40, 50, 60 years in front of him is dead. And so, yeah, Daunte Wright's life was cut short for no reason. And even more importantly, when you peel back the layer of this onion, the frustrating part, if we're going to level set and keep it 100, John, as we always do, is white folk who want to say, well, why didn't he comply? Or he had misdemeanors. Where none of those things are death penalty crimes. I mean, we feel like we have to go through this over and over again. You lose Daunte, and then they try to sully his name in death. And, you know, you think about what happened with our Army lieutenant, or you think about what happened with Tamir Rice. Even if you comply, or Philando Castile, you still don't get the same benefits that other people in this country get. And so, you know, this is a tough day, but I think that Ms. Dorsey will agree with me that I think one of the first emotions that most black people in this country feel today is just one of pure exhaustion.
Sergeant, to you, obviously the question is the one that John raised, which is how could that even happen? How could you shoot a gun and think it was a taser? But can we step before that? Why was such aggression used in the first place? When they pulled him over, even if there is an outstanding warrant, why such aggression from the beginning that escalated into this?
Because police officers, by and large, have come to learn that there is not a consequent commensurate with their bad act. The police chief is being intellectually dishonest and disingenuous when he tries to tell us that this was a mistake. This wasn't a mistake, it was murder. As a 20-year veteran patrol officer, I can promise you we handle our duty weapons daily to make sure that they're properly maintained as we put them in our holster for a number of reasons. And so it would be impossible almost to make that kind of a mistake, to not know your service weapon, your duty weapon, from a taser. We know our weapons intimately, much like a mother knows her child's voice on a playground. And so I'm not buying any of this. They are trying to mitigate the civil liability that's coming.
You know, Bakari, you mentioned exhaustion, and I can hear it in your voice. I can hear the exhaustion in your voice. We are, you know, it's a year, not even a year, since the killing of George Floyd, 10 miles from where the trial is happening. And, you know, the question is, how could this be happening in the shadow of the trial less than a year after, when all these questions were raised then?
I mean, let me ask just a even different question. Like, you know, a lot of black folk have been saying this has been going on for a long period of time, but before body cameras. I mean, there are people who think that this just started happening with the emergence of body cameras, but ask how many of these things happened prior to body cameras? How many lives were lost because of quote unquote accidents? Now, I'm with Sergeant Dorsey here. It's an accident when you go to the Starbucks in the studio building and they put Jim Sciutto on your coffee instead of John Berman. Like, that's an accident. Like, you don't have an accident that ends up with a murder. That is just not something that happens when your taser and your service weapon are on different sides. I mean, we know the history of that confusion, or quote-unquote confusion, from Fruitville Station. And we know the changes and the adaptations that were made since then. But the question is, you know, when you have Derek Chauvin 10 miles away from where you have this officer murdering Daunte Wright. What are we teaching law enforcement? I mean, this is when you have people like me who push back on some of the fringes of my party and say that, you know, this is not an irredeemable, you know, police are not irredeemable. We have to reimagine what they should look like. And it's just so hard when you're going out here advocating for reforms that can save lives, when you quote unquote make mistakes like this. This is just unacceptable. And the police chief's response is intellectually dishonest, as Sergeant Dorsey said, and it's unacceptable as well.
Sergeant Dorsey, to the point that that Bakari just made, Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, tweeted this overnight, and I'd like your reaction from the law enforcement position that you held for so long. She writes this: "It wasn't an accident. Policing in our country is inherently and intentionally racist. Daunte Wright was met with aggression and violence. I am done with those who condone government-funded murder. No more policing, incarceration, and militarization. It can't be reformed." What do you say to her this morning and all who agree with her?
Well, I'm in total agreement. And listen, I believe the only reform and training that police officers need going forward is a conviction, because they understand that when there's a penalty that's commensurate, equal to what they do, when they understand that, oh my God, there was an officer just a couple of counties over who's doing time right now for this very thing, maybe they would show a little impulse control. In the midst of all that's going on, officers still are not able to comport themselves in a way that's appropriate when they deal with black folks. We saw insurrectionists armed, and they weren't met with the kind of resistance that we see unarmed black men on a day-to-day basis being met with and then excused away with, oops, my bad.
Sergeant Dorsey, Bakari, thank you both very much for being with us this morning. As always, we appreciate your insight.
Thank you both. And as